I'll start with two of the most important built-in functions right away. I will start with the set timeout function here. And as I explained, this is a built-in function or a method on the window object to be precise. So on this window object, and again in the browser, you are on this window object by default. This is your global scope. You can execute the set timeout method. Now what will this method do? It will wait for a certain amount of milliseconds you specify, and then it will execute a function. Therefore, this method here expects two arguments. The first argument is the function it should execute. And now here you could either point towards a function you created in your code with the traditional approaches you learned, or you can pass a closure, so an anonymous function here. I'll do the latter, and I will just provide a function, then the code which should get executed. And remember, we're still inside the argument list here. So then I will add a comma to add the second argument. Here I specify the amount of milliseconds this timeout or this timer should wait before executing this function. So I'll specify 2000, so 2 seconds. And then I want to print finished. Now what do you think we'll see if I hit run? Well, nothing for 2 seconds, but then finished. Because, well, as explained, this set timeout function will wait for 2 seconds and then execute all the code inside this function, which is passed as the first argument. And this is a very important built-in method, which of course allows you to trigger some events in your application, to create little animations, for example, to fetch some code after a specific time has passed, and so on. So really something important which allows you to create awesome user experiences and which you'll often use in your application. Now, another very important built-in function is setInterval. Now, as set timeout, this is registered on the window object. It's a method of the window object, and it works very similar. It also expects a function as the first argument. And again, you don't have to use a closure here. You could just point towards a function you created in the code like you learned it before. And then as a second argument, you provide the interval in milliseconds. For example, 500 for half a second. Now what this function will do is it will run this function you specify, .log, as a first argument, so this function here, every 500 milliseconds, so twice a second basically. And it won't stop by default. So if I now print ping here, for example, to show each individual ping, I can hit run. And well, you get a lot of pings, and that won't stop. So in order to stop, I'll get rid of the code here, hit run again to run the new code, and now I finished this. So now I just reverted back to the old state. Now, of course, as you saw, this function keeps running, so it executes this code twice a second in this case. And maybe you want this behavior, maybe you do need an interval which has to run some code every 5 seconds or whatever in your application. But maybe you want to stop it at some time in the future. To do this, I'll create a variable named interval, and I just assign setInterval to this variable. So now I just have a reference to this setInterval method here. And then let's say at some point in my code, I run a certain check where I see if I still need the interval, and I will demonstrate this with the timeout function here. So I'll have the timeout function from before, and let's say after 2500 seconds, I'll want to stop the interval. And I can do this with the clear interval method, also available on the window object, and I pass the interval, so this variable in which I stored this interval. So now if I hit run, what do you think we'll see? Well, we got ping 5 times, because we're, well, executing it 5 times. 2500 milliseconds by 500 divided by 500. So we have this timeout which will stop the interval here after 2.5 seconds, which of course means that the interval got fired 5 times until then. And this is how you can work with set timeout and set interval to, well, execute code depending on some timing. And which, again, as mentioned before, might be used for creating nice animations, fetching some data, or whatever. You'll probably often use this, and it's important to know how to use it, how to clear this interval if you don't need it anymore, and how both functions can interact with each other, like this. Of course, you could also call set timeout inside an interval, or the other way around. There are no limitations. These are just built-in methods and can be used as such.